What if the crown just erased Prince Harry and handed his royal legacy to someone no one saw coming? The air around Buckingham Palace was still, unnaturally so. It was one of those rare moments in royal history where silence didn't mean peace. It meant pressure. Pressure that had been building for years, perhaps decades. And when it finally broke, it did so without fanfare, without a dramatic speech or televised ceremony. Just a few lines published quietly on the royal website. A decision years in the making, calculated with the precision of a grandmaster preparing his endgame. King Charles had just made his final move. A move so piercing, so deliberate, that it has left not just the monarchy shaking, but Los Angeles, thousands of miles away, spinning into chaos. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. In what now appears to be one of the most strategic, unforgiving decisions of his reign, King Charles removed Prince Harry's title, the Duke of Sussex, and handed it over to a man who has always stood just outside the limelight, Sir Timothy Lawrence. A man known more for his naval career and quiet devotion to Princess, and than for any desire to stand center stage. But now, he stands in the very place once occupied by Diana's son, as the symbol of trusted royal duty. And the fallout, particularly in California where Prince Harry and Meghan Markle built their royal rebellion, has been nothing short of explosive. To the public, it was just another twist in the endlessly dramatic saga of the House of Windsor. But to those within palace walls and private Californian mansions, this was a seismic power shift. One that signaled not just a rejection of Prince Harry's choices, but the beginning of a calculated campaign to rewrite royal history, title by title, legacy by legacy. Why now? Why Sir Timothy? And what exactly does this mean for Harry, Meghan, their children, and the monarchy as a whole? This video peels back every layer of this decision, from the cold strategy behind King Charles's move, to the emotional aftermath that played out behind closed doors in LA. You'll witness how years of frustration and failed reconciliations culminated in this bold chess move. You'll see why Sir Timothy, a man who rarely speaks to the press, suddenly found himself at the heart of royal restructuring. And you'll feel the weight of the chaos that followed, from media frenzy to private meltdowns to whispered betrayals. But let's not rush into it. Because to understand just how monumental this moment is, you have to go back. Back before the title was ever stripped. Before Harry became the Duke of Sussex. Before Meghan joined the royal family. Before the smiling weddings, the royal tours, the Oprah interviews, and the Netflix deals. Before it all turned into a global soap opera. This story begins where most endings do, in silence. The kind of silence that drips with consequence. The truth is, few in the public noticed the moment it happened. A quiet update was made to the royal family's official site. The Duke of Sussex page was adjusted. The title, which once prominently crowned Prince Harry's biography, had been removed from key ceremonial listings. In its place, not just an empty space, but a name almost no one saw coming. Sir Timothy Lawrence. It didn't take long for royal watchers to catch it. Then came the calls, then the headlines, then the confusion, and then the reckoning. For those watching from Los Angeles, especially from the lavish Montecito mansion where Harry and Meghan now reside, the news hit like a sharp gust of wind slamming a door you forgot was open. No warning, just the unmistakable thud of something ending. Royal insiders, normally reserved and tight-lipped, couldn't hide their surprise. It's not just a title, one palace source said. It's a message, a definitive message. But what message exactly? And to whom? To Harry, it said, the crown no longer waits for you to find your footing. The monarchy moves on with or without you. To Meghan, it said, the ties you once fought to keep and later fought to escape have now been severed completely, by royal hand. To the public, it was a bold demonstration that King Charles was no longer operating from a place of sentimentalism. The father was gone. The monarch was now in command. And the pieces that once played by their own rules were being removed, replaced, reassigned. And to Sir Timothy? Well, it said something quite different. It said, loyalty is rewarded. Quiet service is never forgotten. And in the new kingdom, those who never asked for power may very well end up with it. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To truly grasp the weight of this final chess move, we need to walk through the palace corridors of recent years. Rooms filled with cold stares, clenched fists, and broken conversations. The failed summits, the tense phone calls, the missed funerals, the public accusations, the letters returned unopened. We must revisit the very fabric of what unraveled the bond between a father and his son, between a monarchy and one of its most beloved modern figures. And we must also meet the man who, without ever raising his voice, has now taken up the role once held by the very man who accused the royal family of cruelty and racism on international television. Because Sir Timothy Lawrence didn't ask for this. He didn't lobby. He didn't hint. He didn't maneuver. But he received it anyway. Which raises the question, was this King Charles's ultimate insult to his son, or the ultimate compliment to his sister's husband? That's the story you're about to witness. Over the next chapters, we'll take you through the corridors of power, both gilded and digital. From palace briefings to LA meltdowns. From military officers to royal advisors. From silence to storm. You'll hear the facts, but more importantly, you'll understand the emotions. The betrayals. The calculations. The heartbreak. The relief. Because while the world saw a title shift, what really happened was a royal execution masked in royal tradition. This isn't just about monarchy. It's about legacy. About who gets to inherit it, and who gets erased from it. And so, we begin with the announcement, silent, precise, surgical. The moment Buckingham Palace posted the notice, the communications team didn't blink. There were no press conferences, no speeches. Just a quiet reshuffling of names on the royal site, a few ceremonial duties updated, and an internal memo sent to a tightly held circle. But the media exploded anyway. Within an hour, hashtags began trending. Hashtag Sussex stripped. Hashtag Sir Timothy rises, hashtag Charles final move. Even tabloids not typically focused on royalty plastered their digital covers with headlines suggesting a total royal collapse or victory, depending on the audience. And in Los Angeles, the streets around Montecito's elite hills went quiet. Not literally, but in the way cameras stopped rolling, emails stopped being answered, and certain phone calls were suddenly too uncomfortable to take. Inside the Sussex home, the news had reportedly arrived not through the palace, but via a text from an aide in London who had stayed friendly with Meghan. What happened next? A source close to the household described it this way. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She froze. And then she said, they finally did it. Prince Harry, for his part, was said to have gone completely silent. No rage. No tears. Just silence. Not the kind of silence you use when you're thinking. The kind of silence that happens when you realize something is truly over. Not a chapter, not a role, but a bond. The title had been more than ceremonial for Harry. It was a link to his mother, a reminder of who he was meant to become, not just the spare, but the soldier, the duke, the man of duty. And now it belonged to someone else. A man he never had any personal quarrel with. A man who had married into the family quietly, served the country respectfully, and remained firmly outside the spotlight. But who now, symbolically, sat in the very chair Harry had walked away from. That's where the story begins. Let's take it from the top. Let's go inside the palace the day the title changed. Let's find out how it was orchestrated. Who signed off? Who objected? Who knew in advance? And what it means not just for Prince Harry, but for the monarchy itself. Because this isn't just Charles's final chess move. This is a game that was set in motion the moment Harry left the board. And someone unexpected, was always waiting to take his place. The moment was disarmingly quiet. No trumpets. No televised address. No formal gathering of the Privy Council or ceremonial flourish. And yet, it sent shockwaves through every corridor of British power and every corner of global royal commentary. The monarchy, an institution historically defined by spectacle and tradition, chose a whisper over a roar. The message, however, could not have been louder. When Buckingham Palace quietly altered the royal family's official website, it marked the end of an era. Buried within updates to ceremonial schedules and official duties was a subtle but unmistakable shift. Prince Harry, once proudly listed as the Duke of Sussex under royal assignments, had been removed from key titles related to military and public representation. In his place appeared the name of someone long believed to be too distant from the royal center to matter politically, Vice Admiral Sir Timothy Lawrence, the husband of Princess Anne. For those unfamiliar with the inner workings of the monarchy, this change may have looked procedural, perhaps even bureaucratic. But for those who understand the coded language of royal decisions, this was a formal execution of a legacy. And it was done with the kind of restraint that only power at its most absolute can wield. The crown had spoken, and it had done so without uttering a single word. The media caught on within hours. Royal reporters, accustomed to reading between lines and drawing significance from details most would overlook, began sounding the alarm. First came a flurry of calls to palace aides, all of whom either offered no comment or referred journalists back to the official website. Then came the headlines. In London, the Daily Mail ran a headline that was both sardonic and sharp. From prince to pawn, Sir Timothy steps in as Sussex steps out. The Guardian took a more reserved tone, focusing on the legal implications of reassignment. But it was the Times that framed the story with the most biting clarity. Charles makes his move. Behind closed doors at the palace, the silence wasn't as serene. It was tense, coordinated, controlled. This move had not been made lightly. In fact, palace insiders later revealed that the process to strip Harry of his formal position and to designate a replacement had been debated for more than a year. The decision wasn't merely about titles. It was about the future of the monarchy itself. King Charles, according to sources close to the royal household, had grown increasingly frustrated with the unpredictability of the Sussexes. The couple's interviews, memoirs, legal disputes, and media ventures had turned the British monarchy into the subject of global scrutiny and, at times, ridicule. Worse still, it had created an aura of instability. And for an institution that survives on image, instability is existentially dangerous. So, when Charles was crowned, one of his first quiet mandates was to begin restoring a sense of order to the institution. That meant clarity of roles, realignment of royal duties, and, in the case of Prince Harry, a final reckoning. For months, legal teams reviewed the implications of removing or reassigning titles. Advisors debated whether it would provoke public sympathy for Harry or restore respect for the crown. But in the end, the decision was made. The cost of doing nothing was greater than the risk of backlash. The person chosen to fill Harry's void was, at first glance, unexpected. Sir Timothy Lawrence had never held high public office, never courted attention, and certainly never positioned himself as a central figure in royal affairs. But therein lay the genius of the selection. Where Harry was emotional, outspoken, and controversial, Timothy was calm, discreet, and loyal. His military background, impeccable record of service, and low profile made him the ideal candidate to symbolize the new royal ethos, duty without drama. It is worth understanding just how radical this shift was. In traditional royal protocols, titles like Duke of Sussex aren't reassigned at whim. They are bestowed by the monarch, yes, but they are also symbols of bloodline, loyalty, and historical continuity. For a monarch to effectively revoke such a title and reassign its functional duties to someone outside the direct line of succession was practically unheard of in modern history. It marked a bold redefinition of how monarchy functioned in the 21st century. And yet, the palace didn't trumpet the decision. No press conference. No herald. Just a quiet update on the website and a string of quiet confirmations to high-ranking officials and stakeholders in the armed forces, who had grown tired of the ambiguity around Harry's military patronages. Inside Parliament, the decision sparked quiet murmurs. Some MPs, especially those aligned with Republican sentiments, saw the move as an unnecessary escalation in the war between the Crown and the Sussexes. Others applauded the firm stance. One senior government official, speaking off record, commented, "The king is sending a message not just to Harry, but to the public. There will be no more wavering. This monarchy will be stable or it will not be at all." The public reaction was, as always, polarized. In Britain, especially among royal loyalists, there was a sense of relief. Finally, the royal family was cleaning house, ending what many saw as years of embarrassment and half measures. For them, this was a necessary correction. But across the Atlantic, especially among Harry and Meghan's supporters, the move was seen as petty, even cruel. Social media lit up with hashtags calling for the monarchy's end, boycotts of royal news, and fresh waves of support for the Sussexes. Yet, amidst the noise, Buckingham Palace remained silent. There would be no public response, no clarification, no apology. That, too, was strategic. The palace had learned from years of media battles that engagement with controversy only fed it. Silence, on the other hand, created distance. It gave the monarchy the appearance of control, even when the public narrative spun wildly. And so, the decision stood. Sir Timothy would begin appearing in ceremonial duties once associated with Harry. Military units previously under Harry's patronage were reassigned. Foreign dignitaries were updated on protocol changes. Private letters were sent to Commonwealth partners. All of it done with the slow, methodical pace of a centuries-old institution adjusting its balance. Behind the scenes, King Charles was reportedly more resolved than ever. Sources within Clarence's house described the king as quiet, but unshaken. His resolve was fueled not just by principle, but by a deep belief that the monarchy needed to evolve past sentimentality. He had watched for too long as the royal institution bent to accommodate scandal, hoping it would pass. This time, he wasn't waiting for the storm to end. He was acting in the midst of it, and the ripple effects continued. Royal courtiers began speaking about the change in hushed but definitive tones. One longtime aide summed it up this way: "We've entered the post-Harry era. That doesn't mean we forget him. It means we stop waiting for him." In Montecito, the silence turned into movement. Media agents scrambled. PR advisors huddled. Public appearances were quietly canceled. The Sussex's legal team began reviewing contracts and obligations related to the title. There was talk, unconfirmed, of Meghan considering a new public platform to respond to the shift, a podcast, a written op-ed, maybe even a filmed sit-down. Yet, for all the noise around them, the decision from the crown remained immovable. It was final. Harry had lost not just a title, but the royal system's last thread of patience. And as Sir Timothy prepared for his first appearance under his new duties, the symbolism became undeniable. A man who had never asked for the spotlight now stood in the center of it. A monarch who had once pleaded for family unity had now drawn a line in marble. And a son who once walked beside his father during a funeral procession now found himself erased from the very institution that had shaped his life. The crown had spoken, and it had done so with terrifying clarity. For years, he walked beside royalty without ever being truly noticed. He stood behind Princess and at state dinners, walked a step behind her during royal engagements, and appeared in the background of countless photographs, usually expressionless, always composed. His voice rarely carried in public spaces, and his opinions were never quoted in the tabloids. To the world, Sir Timothy Lawrence was a shadow present, polite, but ultimately peripheral. Yet, in a stunning twist that has rocked the British monarchy to its core, it is this very man who now occupies a space once reserved for one of its most controversial and visible sons. Sir Timothy Lawrence has never chased power. That's what makes his sudden rise all the more fascinating. He didn't seek titles or demand recognition. He didn't offer exclusive interviews or build a public-facing brand. Instead, he served, quietly, relentlessly, with a kind of diligence that is increasingly rare in public life. And perhaps that is precisely why King Charles chose him. To understand the full significance of Sir Timothy's new role, one must look back at the man himself. The upbringing, the values, the discipline, and the loyalty that have defined him since birth. Because this is not just a man who married into the royal family. This is a man whose entire life prepared him for the weight he now carries. Born on March 1, 1955, in Camberwell, South London, Timothy James Hamilton Lawrence came into the world with little fanfare. The son of Commander Guy Lawrence, a naval officer, and Barbara Allison Lawrence, his roots were modest but respectable, rooted in service, discipline, and national duty. The Lawrence family was not aristocratic. They did not dine with dukes or dance at palace balls. But they believed in honor, structure, and the value of serving something larger than oneself. Timothy's early education was rigorous. He attended the New Beacon Preparatory School in Kent before progressing to Sevenoaks School, where he was known not for flash or charisma, but for a quiet intensity and steadfast reliability. Friends remember him as the student who never broke the rules, who listened more than he spoke, who approached every task with precision. He wasn't the type to chase popularity. He was the type who always finished what he started. From Sevenoaks, he advanced to the University of Durham, where he studied geography. But it was not the academic halls that would define his future, it was the sea. Like his father, Timothy felt the call of the Royal Navy early. Upon graduation, he entered naval training, and it didn't take long for his superiors to notice his potential. His performance was clean, competent, and consistent. He wasn't the loudest in the room, but when pressure mounted, it was Lawrence who stayed calm, who executed orders with clarity, who led without ego. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Sir Timothy built a decorated military career. He rose through the ranks steadily, holding a variety of sea and shore appointments. As a naval officer, he was precise, respected, and deeply committed. He earned promotion to commander and served aboard several ships, including HMS Boxer and HMS Cumberland. Later, he held strategic positions within the Ministry of Defense, where he oversaw key logistical and administrative operations. He wasn't the kind of man newspapers wrote about, but within the corridors of the British military, he was known as one of the most reliable and effective officers of his generation. It was during this time that fate intervened. In 1986, Lawrence was appointed as an equerry to Queen Elizabeth II, a personal assistant role traditionally held by military officers. It was a prestigious but largely ceremonial post. He was responsible for organizing schedules, accompanying the Queen at certain functions, and ensuring that day-to-day operations ran smoothly. But it also brought him into contact with other members of the royal family. Chief among them was Princess Anne. What began as professional interactions soon blossomed into something deeper. Anne, known for her bluntness and fierce independence, was unlike most royals. She had no interest in flattery or protocol for protocol's sake. What she admired in Lawrence was his steadiness, his lack of pretense, and his ability to match her intensity without ever trying to overshadow it. Their relationship, once revealed, was controversial at the time, and had divorced her first husband, Captain Mark Phillips, only a few years earlier, at a time when royal divorces were still met with public discomfort. The idea of a royal princess marrying a commoner, even a naval officer, was seen by some as a breach of tradition. But Anne was never one to bow to convention. She married Lawrence in 1992 in a quiet ceremony in Scotland. The wedding was modest by royal standards. No state fanfare, no public holiday, no balcony kiss. Just a private commitment, deeply felt. From that point on, Sir Timothy Lawrence became part of the royal ecosystem. But unlike many who married into the family, he never tried to carve out a public identity. He never gave interviews. Never made headlines. Never positioned himself as a modernizer or disruptor. He attended engagements when appropriate, stood beside his wife with dignity, and returned home with his reputation intact. For decades, Sir Timothy remained an enigma to most of the public. They knew his name, vaguely. They saw him at royal weddings, at the Queen's funeral, at Commonwealth ceremonies. But they rarely heard his voice. He didn't smile for the cameras unless absolutely necessary. He wasn't cold, but he was contained. He knew that royalty, at its best, was about service, not spectacle. So how did such a man become the chosen successor to the duties once held by Prince Harry? The answer lies in what Sir Timothy represents. In a time when the royal family has been rocked by scandal, accusation, and fragmentation, he has remained a symbol of stability. In a world addicted to celebrity, he has modeled discretion. In an age of grievance and confessional culture, he has maintained privacy and personal restraint. And to King Charles, who now leads a monarchy in the shadow of global cynicism, that kind of reliability is worth more than charisma. Sir Timothy is not flashy, but he is dependable. He doesn't speak in sound bites, but he commands respect. And most importantly, he has never betrayed the crown, not through words, nor through actions. The contrast with Harry could not be more stark. Prince Harry, once seen as the royal rebel with a heart of gold, has increasingly become a symbol of disruption. While his motivations may be rooted in personal pain, his methods have brought turbulence. Books, documentaries, interviews, legal battles, each has chipped away at the image of quiet service the monarchy so carefully tries to maintain. Sir Timothy, on the other hand, has quietly spent decades reinforcing that very image. And it is for this reason that, when the moment came to reassign Harry's responsibilities, particularly ceremonial roles with the military and public-facing patronages, King Charles turned to his brother-in-law. This was not just about filling a vacancy. It was a statement, a reshaping of royal identity. By choosing Sir Timothy, the crown was saying, we value loyalty over celebrity, service over self-expression, structure over spectacle. Of course, there is irony in all of this, that a man so content with obscurity now finds himself in a position of extraordinary symbolism. That a naval officer who never sought the spotlight is now the face of a monarch's most controversial decision. But perhaps that's the very point. In a world obsessed with performance, Sir Timothy Lawrence reminds us of the power of quiet competence. He may not be the prince people wrote stories about, but in the end, he became the man trusted to restore order to a fractured royal legacy. In the chapters ahead, we'll explore how this decision has reshaped the dynamics within the royal household, how Princess and responded, how the military reacted, and most importantly, how this move has permanently altered the future of Prince Harry's children, his titles, and his tenuous relationship with the crown. But before we continue, let it be said, Sir Timothy Lawrence is not a placeholder. He is a declaration. A declaration that, in the eyes of the monarchy, duty never left the room. Every royal move, no matter how subtle, has intent behind it. But this wasn't subtle. Stripping Prince Harry of the very title bestowed upon him during the zenith of his royal favor and handing its duties to Sir Timothy Lawrence was a definitive act. It wasn't the result of a hasty emotional decision. This was strategy. Cold, precise, premeditated. A move years in the making, calculated to align not just with the monarchy's long-term stability, but with King Charles's personal philosophy of what royalty must now become. To understand the motive, one must first understand the man. King Charles is not, as many believe, a monarch driven solely by protocol or pageantry. He is a man of contradictions, intensely private yet burdened with public life. Philosophically inclined, emotionally layered, and politically sensitive. He waited 70 years for the crown, the longest heir in waiting in British history. That's 70 years of observation, of watching the monarchy falter and survive, of witnessing the rise and collapse of royal figures, and of learning that the strength of the institution does not lie in sentiment, but in structure. For decades, Charles was labeled as temperamental, opinionated, and even irrelevant. But beneath that caricature was a man shaped by generational trauma and institutional rigidity. He watched his parents' marriage unfold as duty more than intimacy. He married Diana Spencer out of obligation, and the consequences of that union, both public and personal, haunt him to this day. He raised two sons in a palace obsessed with image, only to see one become a future king and the other a global symbol of rebellion. Harry's decision to leave the royal family wasn't merely a disappointment to Charles. It was a fracture to a carefully balanced legacy. It was one thing for Edward VIII to abdicate in 1936 for love. But for a modern prince to resign from duty and then launch public campaigns of criticism, Netflix specials, memoirs, televised interviews was an entirely new threat. It undermined the family, challenged the palace's narrative, and placed the monarchy in a defensive posture. And that, more than anything else, violated Charles's long-held belief that the crown must rise above the storm. For a time, Charles tried to maintain a delicate balance. In private, he expressed sorrow. Letters sent to Harry were said to contain genuine attempts at reconciliation. He encouraged palace aides to avoid antagonizing the Sussexes publicly, hoping time would ease their grievances. But as the months wore on, it became clear that the rupture was not healing. Every attempt at dialogue was followed by another public revelation. Every effort at restraint was answered with a fresh round of allegations. When Harry released Spare, a book that tore into the monarchy with the force of a wrecking ball, Charles's patience waned. While the press focused on salacious details, the frostbite, the fights, the psychic mediums, Charles focused on what he saw as the deeper betrayal. Harry had dismantled the concept of discretion, one of the monarchy's last surviving shields. And worse, he did so while still clinging to the benefits of his royal lineage. The title, Duke of Sussex, was no mere formality. It opened doors. It legitimized Harry's place in global affairs. It anchored his brand. Even as Harry walked away from royal duties, the title remained as tethered to heritage, influence, and public curiosity. And to King Charles, that inconsistency had become unsustainable. So the king began to plan. According to palace insiders, the idea of formally removing Harry's title was first floated in late 2022. But advisors warned it would be perceived as vindictive, that it could trigger a public backlash or even further legal action. Charles, characteristically patient, shelved the idea. But after the release of Harry and Meghan's Netflix docuseries, particularly the insinuations of institutional cruelty, racism, and negligence, his resolve hardened. He convened a small, trusted circle, private secretaries, legal advisors, and key members of the royal household. Discussions were held in secrecy. Alternatives were weighed. Could the title be suspended instead of removed? Could duties be redistributed without public explanation? Could the military patronages be reassigned without touching the Duke's formal designation? Each option was debated. But in the end, Charles came to a firm conclusion. The monarchy could no longer afford ambiguity. The institution must project strength. And that strength could not coexist with a titleholder who actively opposed its values. Still, Charles knew the move would draw scrutiny. He needed to ensure that it didn't appear petty or vengeful. That meant framing the decision not as a punishment, but as a practical restructuring of royal roles. He needed a replacement, someone unimpeachable, apolitical, and free from scandal. Someone who wouldn't provoke comparisons or fuel gossip. Someone who embodied the quiet dignity the monarchy desperately needed to reclaim. Enter Sir Timothy Lawrence. The choice was deliberate, not random. Sir Timothy's record was spotless, his loyalty to the crown unwavering. And most crucially, his relationship with Princess Anne made him an acceptable and familiar figure to the public. Assigning him the duties once held by Harry would be seen not as a demotion for the prince, but as a redirection, an attempt to realign the monarchy with its traditional values. Charles did not take the step lightly. Despite public perception, he remains a father, and whatever disappointment he feels toward Harry is tempered by paternal ache. But in his mind, the needs of the institution come first. That has always been the doctrine passed down by his mother, Queen Elizabeth II. The crown is not a person, but a symbol. It must be preserved at all costs. And so, the king made his move. He did so quietly, strategically, and without delay. The website was updated. Military patronages reassigned. Key departments notified. The shift was made not with a royal decree, but with a quiet, administrative stroke. There would be no press release, no ceremony, no statement of justification. Because in the monarchy, power does not always need to be explained. It simply needs to be exercised. Charles's advisors praised the decision as elegant. It sent a message without inviting debate. It reinforced hierarchy without stoking drama. It was, in many ways, a chess master's endgame, not explosive, but fatal to opposition. A move not of passion, but of principle. But what exactly was the principle? It wasn't just that Harry had spoken out. Other royals have done the same in history. It was that Harry had done so while clinging to royal identity. He sought independence but wanted the institution's seal of approval. He left, but continued to profit off of being a prince. That duality was, to Charles, a betrayal not just of family, but of structure. This decision was also meant as a warning. To other members of the royal family, to aides, to the press, the days of loose allegiance were over. You were either in service to the crown, or you were out. No middle ground. No double lives. It was a subtle tightening of the royal belt, a recalibration of authority. And in that context, Sir Timothy's appointment wasn't just about filling a gap. It was about sending a signal that loyalty would be rewarded, that quiet service mattered, that the institution would elevate those who protected it, not those who weaponized it for personal fame. Of course, Charles knew the consequences would be personal. He knew Harry would be wounded, that Meghan would view the move as an attack, that the media would dissect the decision endlessly. But he did it anyway, because the survival of the monarchy required it. Behind the walls of Clarence House, those close to the king describe him as more resolved than ever. They say he believes his reign will be defined not by grandeur, but by restoration, that the monarchy must be leaner, sharper, and less entangled in scandal. And to achieve that, he must make hard decisions, ones his mother never dared to make. He may not say it aloud, but the symbolism is clear. Prince Harry was a bridge too far, and that bridge has now been burned. What happens next is uncertain. Will Harry retaliate? Will Meghan launch new projects in response? Will the public see this as a rightful correction or a royal cruelty? Time will tell. But what is clear is this: King Charles has shown the world that he is no passive monarch, that he will wield the full weight of the crown to defend its future. That sentiment will no longer outweigh sovereignty, and that, when necessary, even a father must act like a king. The next chapter in this unfolding royal saga is no longer about regret. It's about resolve. And with one quiet move, King Charles has redrawn the board. The title Duke of Sussex is more than just an honorary label. It's a historical artifact, a centuries-old symbol of royal favor, military duty, public responsibility, and national identity. It is woven into the pageantry of the British monarchy like gold thread through a tapestry. And when it was granted to Prince Harry on May 19, 2018, the morning of his wedding to Meghan Markle, it was given not merely as a gift, but as a mantle of trust, service, and legacy. For King Charles to allow that title to be functionally stripped away from his own son was a decision that echoed far beyond ceremonial tradition. It sent a wave of symbolism across every royal institution, every Commonwealth state, and every family kitchen where Britons gathered to discuss the fate of the monarchy. It was a line drawn in granite, one that made clear, royal blood is no longer enough. Allegiance and action matter more than lineage. The origins of the Sussex title date back to the early 19th century. The title was first conferred in 1801 upon Prince Augustus Frederick, the sixth son of King George III. Notably, Prince Augustus's marriages were considered unlawful under the Royal Marriages Act 1772, and his offspring were not permitted to inherit the title, causing the line to become extinct. For over 2 centuries, the title lay dormant, locked in the vault of royal history, until Queen Elizabeth II revived it as part of Prince Harry's wedding honor. It was meant to represent a new beginning, a modern prince, a biracial duchess, and a global bridge between the crown and contemporary Britain. But that vision didn't last. Barely 2 years after receiving the title, Harry and Meghan shocked the world with their announcement in January 2020 they would be stepping back from their roles as senior royals. At first, there was ambiguity. They promised to continue supporting the Queen, to serve the monarchy in a progressive new role, and to remain committed to their patronages. But the palace saw things differently. You were either in or out. There was no halfway house. What followed was a storm of institutional confusion. Could Harry and Meghan still be styled as their royal highnesses? Could they still represent the Queen at public events? Could they use their titles commercially in their projects? The palace's response was cautious but decisive. They would retain their Duke and Duchess titles, but they could no longer use the style of HRH. Furthermore, they would not be allowed to use their titles in a working capacity. And so began the quiet decay of the title's meaning. On paper, Harry remained the Duke of Sussex. But in practice, the title had been hollowed out. He no longer attended military ceremonies on behalf of the crown. He was no longer a formal patron of the Rugby Football Union or the Royal Marines. He had traded his military dress uniform for designer suits and Netflix documentaries. For a time, there was speculation that the palace might strip the title entirely. But the monarchy is slow to act when the consequences are unpredictable. Stripping a title from a prince, especially one with such public sympathy, could backfire. It could be seen as vindictive, especially in a media climate increasingly suspicious of old institutions. But as the months turned to years, and as Harry's critiques of the royal family grew sharper, the pressure mounted. Public sentiment began to shift. Even moderate monarchists began questioning why someone who had effectively turned against the institution was still allowed to carry one of its most sacred emblems. The final straw, according to sources close to the royal household, wasn't any one interview or book release. It was a gradual erosion, a slow realization that Prince Harry was no longer tethered to the values that the title symbolized. And when palace aides began the quiet transition of duties, reassigning military roles, appointing Sir Timothy Lawrence to represent the monarchy in Harry's former domains, it became clear that the title, though not legally revoked, had been effectively neutralized. Behind the scenes, this process was anything but simple. First, the legal logistics. Titles in the UK are governed by letters patent, legal instruments issued by the monarch that grant or confirm rights and titles. Revoking a title requires either the issuance of a new letters patent or an act of parliament. It is a delicate process, rarely used. In fact, the last time a peerage was formally removed by Parliament was during World War I under the Titles Deprivation Act 1917, which stripped German sympathizers of their British titles. Charles, ever conscious of constitutional balance, wanted to avoid a legislative spectacle. Instead, he opted for what insiders call functional reassignment. That is, allowing the title to remain as a nominal formality while systematically transferring all its associated duties, honors, and privileges to another royal figure. In this case, that figure was Sir Timothy Lawrence. This allowed the king to achieve his objective without inviting the wrath of lawmakers or sparking a constitutional debate. By stripping the title of its operational weight, Charles had, in essence, performed a silent revocation. The reaction from Harry's camp was immediate, though not public. Sources in Montecito described the mood as stunned, then furious. Harry, who had once considered the title part of his identity, now faced the reality that he had been symbolically removed from the monarchy's inner circle. Meghan, whose own title of Duchess of Sussex was indirectly impacted by the move, reportedly questioned whether the palace intended to target her next. From a branding perspective, the implications were severe. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex brand had underpinned many of the couple's commercial ventures, from charitable foundations to media partnerships. The sudden shift rendered their public identity murky. Were they now private citizens? Exiled royals? Cultural commentators? This uncertainty reverberated through Hollywood. Industry executives who had bet on the Sussexes' star power began to reconsider long-term partnerships. Streaming platforms grew cautious. Invitations slowed. The currency of the title, once a golden ticket, was now a question mark. Back in the UK, the decision sparked fierce debate. Royal traditionalists praised the move as necessary. To them, the title was a sacred mantle, not a prop for personal ventures. It belonged to those who served the crown, not those who profited from its rejection. The public, they argued, deserved clarity and integrity from their monarchy. But critics saw the decision as cold, even cruel. Harry, they insisted, had suffered deeply under the constraints of royal life. His exit was not betrayal but self-preservation. Stripping his title, even informally, was an act of punishment disguised as policy. Still, most observers agreed on one thing. The way it was done was masterful. By not formally revoking the title, King Charles avoided direct confrontation. By reassigning duties to Sir Timothy, he preserved the integrity of the institution. And by remaining silent throughout the process, he denied the Sussexes a media opportunity to frame the narrative. It was monarchy by chessboard. Strategic, deliberate, ruthless. But beyond politics and ceremony, there was also a personal layer to this act. One that touched on the most intimate wounds of a father-son relationship. For Charles, the title represented more than just public duty. It was one of the last meaningful gifts he had given Harry. A royal endorsement. A gesture of love and hope. A signal that, despite their differences, Harry had a place in the future of the crown. To take that back, even symbolically, was not a simple matter of protocol. It was an emotional cut. A final acknowledgement that the relationship, as it once existed, had changed forever. In the months that followed the reassignment, Harry remained largely silent. Public appearances grew sparse. Statements were few. Some speculated he was regrouping. Others believed he was mourning, not just the title, but the possibility of ever returning to the royal fold. And perhaps he was. Because the title of Duke of Sussex wasn't just a name. It was a link to everything he had been raised to become. And now it was gone. Not by decree, but by design. What remains is a new royal landscape. One where titles are no longer permanent, where loyalty is the currency of trust, and where even a prince can become a stranger to the crown. And in that landscape, Sir Timothy Lawrence now walks quietly in a role once destined for Diana's son. The symbolism is inescapable. The monarchy has spoken. It will move forward, with or without you. The morning the change was noticed across British media, Montecito did not wake up to birdsong and sunshine. For all its postcard-perfect serenity, gated mansions nestled in the Santa Ynez Mountains, with the Pacific Ocean shimmering in the distance. There was an unmistakable tension in the air, and inside one particular estate, tucked behind thick hedges and security surveillance, the stillness broke the moment Meghan Markle's phone began to ring. A journalist friend had seen the update on the royal family's official website. Prince Harry's name no longer appeared where it used to. The title, the privileges, the responsibilities, they weren't just in question. They were gone. Or worse, given to someone else. The line wasn't bold. The formatting hadn't changed dramatically. But the absence spoke louder than any headline. And what followed inside that Montecito mansion wasn't just disbelief, it was sheer chaos. At first, silence. Meghan, usually sharp and responsive, froze. According to a close associate who was present that day, she reread the message 4 times before saying a word. Her expression hardened, not in sadness, but in restrained fury. They really did it, she muttered, walking across the room. Prince Harry entered moments later, unshaven, visibly drained, his mood unreadable. The look he gave her said everything he already knew. He had seen it too. The blood drained from his face not because of shock, but because some part of him knew this day would come. He just didn't expect it to come this way. The fallout was immediate. Their public relations team, which had spent months crafting a refreshed public image around causes, humanitarian work, and the concept of service beyond the crown, began fielding panicked calls. Should they issue a response? A denial? A legal inquiry to the palace? Or worse, another Oprah-style interview? Inside Meghan's private office, assistants scrambled to contact key partners. Netflix, Spotify, Penguin Random House, WME. These weren't just media platforms, they were pillars of the couple's post-royal empire. And the looming question now is this. If Harry is no longer functionally the Duke of Sussex, what does that mean for the brand? What does that mean for the memoir? The animated series in pre-production? The lifestyle blog Meghan was rumored to be launching? What does it mean when the title that once set them apart from every Hollywood couple in town now rang hollow? It's important to understand just how foundational that title was to the Sussex identity in America. Unlike in the UK, where royal titles come with formality and historical weight, in the United States they're treated as quasi-celebrity credentials. Duke of Sussex carried the same glitz as Oscar-winning actor or former president. It was shorthand for global relevance, a ticket to boardroom meetings and benefit galas, and a key line in every headline. Without the functional weight of that title, and now that Sir Timothy had effectively absorbed its role, the Sussex's identity blurred. Not to the average American viewer, perhaps, but to those within the industry, studio execs, publishing houses, donors, marketers. People began asking uncomfortable questions. If Harry was no longer a working royal in any formal way, could they still build projects branded around his royal past? If Meghan no longer had access to that aura of proximity to the crown, could she still market her story as royal authenticity? Some consultants privately advised a complete rebranding, moving away from royal affiliation entirely and leaning into humanitarianism, social justice, and celebrity activism. But that would be a sharp pivot and a costly one. Too many contracts, too many expectations, and too many millions had been built on the idea that Harry and Meghan were not just celebrities, but royals turned rebels. Remove the royal, and what's left? Back in the house, Harry shut himself away for most of the day. According to one insider, he barely spoke, didn't eat, and refused to answer calls from mutual friends in the UK. It was a deeper kind of hurt than he had ever shown, even after the Oprah interview or the Queen's funeral. Because this wasn't just another scandal. This was erasure. Symbolic erasure by his own family. And worse, it had been done so quietly, so clinically, that it left no room for fight back. Harry had spent the better part of 3 years trying to construct a new life in Los Angeles. He became a father, a producer, a podcaster, a memoirist. He had stepped away from the only world he had ever known to start over. But he had done so assuming that the title, at least, would remain. That no matter what happened, he was still the Duke of Sussex. Still the Queen's grandson. Still a prince, even if he didn't use the style, His Royal Highness. Now, the ground had shifted. And while legally the peerage hadn't been abolished, functionally he was no longer the monarch's representative in any capacity. Every military honor stripped. Every formal duty reassigned. The honor that had once made him one of the most beloved royals, his service record, his Invictus Games legacy, his connection to the armed forces, now carried on by another man. And that man wasn't even born royal. The optics were shattering. And for Meghan, they posed a terrifying dilemma. How do you maintain relevance in a town obsessed with symbolism when the most potent symbol attached to your name has just been handed to someone else? Meghan had always been a strategist. Even before marrying into the royal family, she had understood branding. Her lifestyle blog, her fashion partnerships, her speaking engagements, they were all meticulously curated. This moment demanded re-strategy. But how? She could launch a media offensive, frame the title shift as a sexist and racist punishment, a royal vendetta. But such a move risked public fatigue. Another war with the monarchy might alienate even sympathetic audiences. Or she could stay silent, hoping the public wouldn't fully grasp the implications, especially outside the UK. The problem was, silence could look like surrender, like defeat. In Los Angeles, perception is everything. Within days, rumors began to leak from within the couple's inner circle. Some claimed Meghan was preparing a powerful public letter, addressed not just to the British people, but to King Charles himself. Others said she was considering a feature-length documentary on institutional betrayal, possibly framed through her experiences, but anchored in broader themes of post-royal life and reinvention. There was even talk of her returning to acting, or launching a luxury product line that would sever any remaining dependency on royal association. But all of it was reactionary. The truth was, the Sussexes had been blindsided. And that kind of unpreparedness doesn't just hurt emotionally, it devastates reputationally. Meanwhile, the media blitz was relentless. British tabloids gloated. American late-night shows speculated. Paparazzi crowded outside the Montecito mansion gates, hoping for a glimpse of the couple, or better yet, a meltdown. There was no meltdown. Not publicly, but there was chaos. Internally, Staffers began whispering about tension between the couple. Meghan, as always, wanted to act, to counter, to stay ahead of the narrative. Harry, however, reportedly withdrew. His silence grew heavier, not out of petulance, but from a place of emotional exhaustion. He had fought so many battles, over his mother's memory, over Meghan's treatment, over the British press, over his own place. He wasn't just a man without a country. He was a man without a title. Even the children, Archie and Lilibet, became part of the equation. If Harry's title was functionally deactivated, what did that mean for their styling? For their place in the royal family tree? For their future identities? And more practically, for their inheritance? Lawyers were reportedly consulted. Publicists redrafted strategies. Meghan's inner circle, including several key players in the entertainment industry, began floating trial balloons in the press, articles speculating about the Sussexes' next act, their growing humanitarian empire, their post-royal lifestyle. It was damage control disguised as optimism, but nothing could change the fact that they had lost something they never thought could be taken away. Los Angeles is known for reinvention. It's where failed actors become producers, where washed-up stars become wellness gurus, where bankrupt brands become tech unicorns. But royal reinvention? That's a far taller order, because royalty isn't a product you can rebrand. It's a lineage, an institution, a symbol, and once you're stripped of that symbol, even subtly, you lose more than leverage. You lose mystique. For Harry, the fallout was spiritual, a realization that perhaps there was no going back, no halfway house, no reconciliation that could undo what had just occurred. He had made his choice years ago, but now, the crown had responded. And the response wasn't rage or reproach. It was replacement. Sir Timothy Lawrence now carried the mantle of service Harry had once embodied, not because he sought it, but because he represented something the monarchy now held sacred: unwavering discretion, quiet service, unquestioned loyalty. And in that contrast, the Sussex brand fractured. What comes next is uncertain. A memoir sequel? A Netflix redemption arc? A legal challenge? Or silence? But one thing is certain. The title is gone. And in Los Angeles, beneath the palm trees and behind the security gates, two people are left to reckon with what that truly means. The world has often seen Prince Harry through a dual lens. On one side, a soldier, a son, a charitable leader grounded in his mother's legacy. On the other, a restless rebel haunted by his past and desperate to define his own future. But following the stripping of his functional title as Duke of Sussex, a move more quietly devastating than anything that came before, the mask dropped. No press statements, no media rebuttals, no visible counterstrike. Only silence. And in that silence, the world saw something raw, something rarely witnessed from a royal figure so often in the public eye. A man coming to terms with being discarded by the very system that raised him. In the days after the title duties were handed to Sir Timothy Lawrence, Prince Harry was reportedly unreachable to many close friends. While Meghan and their media consultants held meetings, drafted responses, and evaluated options, Harry withdrew. He wasn't sulking. This wasn't the quiet of a tantrum. It was the stillness of someone forced to confront a reality he had tried to ignore for years. The monarchy wasn't waiting for him. They had moved on. Officially, structurally, and emotionally. For all his public statements about finding peace and independence in America, Harry had always harbored a hope, perhaps naive, perhaps stubborn, that one day, bridges might be rebuilt. That despite the harsh words exchanged, the lawsuits filed, and the interviews aired, the family would find its way back to him. That the door would remain open. That even if he never returned to royal duties, he would remain a son of the institution. A prince. The Duke of Sussex. A member of the team, if only in name. But that illusion shattered with surgical precision. The moment Sir Timothy was seen representing the crown in a role once assigned to Harry, one involving the armed forces, military charities, and ceremonial honors, it became clear that the monarchy had not just filled a gap. They had replaced a person. According to a longtime friend, Harry was devastated in a way that was deeper than anger. There were no shouting matches. There was just this, exhaustion. Like he'd finally realized that no matter how hard he fought, no one was fighting for him anymore. This wasn't the same kind of betrayal he'd spoken of in his memoir. That was about press intrusion, about his mother, about the institution's failure to protect Meghan. This was different. This was about identity, about being unmoored. Harry had spent much of his adult life trying to reconcile two truths. One, that the royal family had afforded him extraordinary privilege. Two, that it had also robbed him of personal agency. But even as he distanced himself from the institution, he carried its emblems. The titles, the uniforms, the coat of arms. They were his birthright, and perhaps his shield. So to see them transferred, even symbolically, was like watching a part of himself be written out of history. Friends say he spent hours walking the trails near his Montecito home, alone, headphones in but music turned off. Just walking, thinking, replaying conversations with his father, re-examining choices, wondering whether the interviews, the lawsuits, the memoir had been worth it, wondering if anything could have prevented this moment, or if the decision had been made years ago, and all his efforts since had merely delayed the inevitable. He did not speak publicly, not even a vague social media post or a statement through a spokesperson. That in itself was telling. For a man who had spent the last few years reclaiming his voice, silence now said more than any words could. It said he was hurt. Not furious, but broken. He spoke only to his small circle old friends from his military days, a therapist he had been consulting since before moving to California, and, according to Palace insiders, a single phone call to a cousin in the UK. Not to his brother, not to his father. The call, brief and strained, centered on logistics, events he would no longer be attending, patronages he would no longer represent. The conversation reportedly ended with a pause, followed by a simple sentence, "It's done, then." Those close to him say Harry didn't rage about Sir Timothy. He didn't see him as the enemy. In fact, there was a kind of reluctant respect. "Tim's a good man," Harry was said to have told a friend. "He didn't ask for this. He's just doing what's expected." What haunted him wasn't the man. It was the message. Because in royal language, every appointment, every reassignment, every omission is a form of speech. And this one said, "You're not coming back. Not now. Not ever." The pain wasn't just symbolic. It was deeply personal. The Duke of Sussex title had been granted to him on the happiest day of his life. He had walked into St. George's Chapel as a prince and walked out as a husband, a duke, and a symbol of a modernizing monarchy. It had been a moment of unity, of celebration, of renewed purpose. Now, that identity had been quietly rewritten. His name no longer associated with official royal responsibilities. His legacy within the monarchy, slowly evaporating like mist at sunrise. It's no secret that Harry has battled mental health challenges since his youth. The trauma of his mother's death, the pressure of public life, the chaos of royal protocol, all left scars. But in California, he had found a rhythm, a slower pace, a new definition of family. And yet, beneath it all, he remained tied to Britain. Not just the country, but the concept of who he had been within it. That thread, however faint, had now been cut. Meghan reportedly encouraged him to focus on the future, to channel the hurt into purpose. "We're free now," she said to have told him. "Let them have their titles. We have our voice." But voice, as Harry now understood, wasn't everything. Titles carry history. They carry weight. And no matter how flawed the institution, losing that connection felt like being amputated from his past. There were discussions, quiet and serious, about what this meant for their children. If Archie and Lilibet were never styled as prince and princess, would they now also be distanced from their Sussex identity? Would they grow up Americans in full, their British heritage reduced to anecdotes and stories from their father? Harry had always imagined a bridge, however narrow, between his new life and his old one. He thought that one day his children might walk through the gates of Buckingham Palace and feel welcome. Not as royalty necessarily, but as part of something. That hope, however small, had now dimmed. In the weeks that followed the reassignment, Harry avoided the spotlight. He canceled several media appearances, skipped a veterans charity event in Washington, where he was expected to give a speech. His name was removed from a royal military calendar, and quietly, a longtime aide resigned. Not in anger, but in acknowledgement that the chapter had closed. There were no cameras to capture his reaction, no tearful footage, no family confrontation. But those close to him say the pain was visible in his face, in the way he held his jaw, in the long pauses between sentences, in the way he avoided the photographs from official events back home. Because once again, he was on the outside looking in. This wasn't about money, or fame, or headlines. It was about belonging. And for the first time in his life, Harry no longer knew where he belonged. He wasn't a working royal. He wasn't a private citizen entirely. He was a man suspended between two worlds, disowned by one, not fully accepted by the other. And as the dust settled, he faced a choice: to continue fighting for relevance within a system that had rejected him, or to begin again, this time truly detached. For the first time, that second option felt more like a necessity than a choice. And that, perhaps, is the real tragedy of it all, that it took this long to realize the door had already been shut. In the pages of royal history, Princess Anne has never demanded attention, yet she has consistently earned respect. Known for her blunt honesty, unshakable sense of duty, and refusal to indulge in celebrity theatrics, and has long been seen as the monarchy's most undervalued asset. She never sought the spotlight, and yet, in a world increasingly enamored with royal drama, her silence has spoken volumes. So when King Charles entrusted her husband, Vice Admiral Sir Timothy Lawrence, with duties previously associated with Prince Harry, it wasn't just a calculated royal maneuver. It was a quiet nod to Anne's lifelong consistency, loyalty, and influence behind palace walls. While the public and media focused on the transfer of responsibility from Harry to Sir Timothy, those within royal circles understood the deeper implication. Princess Anne was now one of the most powerful figures within the monarchy, not in title, but in influence. And for many, it raised a pointed question. How involved was she in her husband's sudden elevation? Was this a reward for years of unflinching loyalty? Or had Anne, the royal family's most grounded member, simply become the monarchy's moral compass in its most turbulent hour? To understand her role in this moment, one must first understand Anne's relationship with her brother. While King Charles and Prince Andrew have weathered a complicated dynamic punctuated by rivalry and scandal, Anne has always played a different role. She and Charles were born just under 2 years apart, and while their personalities diverged, he, introspective and emotionally layered, she, practical and stoic, they shared an unspoken alliance rooted in their shared burden as royal heirs. Anne's public image was shaped by discipline. She has taken on more official royal engagements in some years than any other member of the family. She is often seen walking ahead, not behind, during public functions, not out of arrogance, but out of a sense of mission. There is no hesitation in her steps, no performance in her gestures. Where others leaned into celebrity and leaned into service. Privately, Anne has always been frank with Charles. Their conversations, according to insiders, are less sentimental and more strategic. She doesn't indulge in emotional spirals. She cuts to the core of issues. And when it became increasingly clear that Harry's actions were not only destabilizing the institution but also draining public sympathy from the rest of the family, and reportedly became one of the few senior royals willing to voice what others wouldn't, she told Charles the truth, a palace aide confided. She said, "You can't run a monarchy like a broken family. You need people you can trust. If someone's walked away, let them walk. But stop pretending they might come back." It was not spoken with malice, and doesn't operate from pettiness. But her years in the royal machine had taught her one thing above all: sentiment cannot cloud structure. You cannot preserve the institution if you refuse to accept when parts of it have fallen away. And by 2023, Anne no longer believed Harry could be part of the institution's future. She also knew what her husband represented. Sir Timothy Lawrence had never asked for the spotlight. Yet, he had carried out royal duties with grace and reliability for decades. He had accompanied Anne on hundreds of official visits. He had represented the crown at events in the Commonwealth, often standing in for more senior royals during scheduling conflicts. And crucially, he had the military credentials to carry out the ceremonial duties Harry once did. To Anne, the solution was obvious. And so, in private discussions, Anne began advocating, not loudly, not politically, but with the quiet force of someone who had earned the right to be heard. She presented the facts to Charles. Timothy was trusted. He was capable. He wouldn't draw media attention or controversy. And most importantly, his elevation wouldn't stir drama. It would send a message: this is no longer about bloodlines. It's about commitment. It wasn't favoritism. It was strategy. And didn't see this as replacing Harry. She saw it as filling a void, efficiently, discreetly, and permanently. Charles, for his part, listened. He has long admired his sister's clarity of purpose, her refusal to be drawn into family scandals or press-driven rivalries, and has always stood apart from royal squabbles, choosing work over whispers. Her advice carried the weight of decades in the trenches of public duty. And more importantly, she had never once failed the crown. When the decision was made to reassign Harry's former duties, including several honorary military roles, to Sir Timothy, it came with Anne's quiet approval. She did not celebrate it. She did not announce it. She simply accepted it as necessary. But inside palace corridors, the mood was different. Those who had long underestimated Anne's influence were suddenly recalibrating. For years, the royal media had obsessed over the Queen, Charles, Diana, and then William and Harry, and had been cast as the stoic workhorse, the background figure, the no-nonsense princess with a ponytail and a scowl. But now, they were beginning to see what insiders had known all along and had power. Not through charisma, not through theatrics, but through consistency. Her support of Sir Timothy's reassignment was more than personal. It was symbolic, a royal endorsement from the family's most dutiful member. And in this moment, Anne wasn't just a sister or a wife, she was the silent architect of a new royal order. One that no longer prioritized youth or public adoration, but competence and reliability. Some speculated that and felt vindicated. That after years of watching younger royals capture headlines while she toiled in the background, her philosophy was finally being validated. But those who know her best say that's not Anne's way. She doesn't seek vindication. She seeks results. And to her, this decision was about fixing a problem. Still, there's no denying that the moment shifted her standing within the family. Her voice now carried institutional weight. Charles increasingly turned to her for counsel. William, already wary of media drama, began emulating her low-key approach. Even palace aides began describing Anne as the anchor of the monarchy in transition. As for her relationship with Harry, it was never particularly warm, but it was not hostile either, and had always viewed Harry as emotional, occasionally reckless, but not malicious. In private, she reportedly expressed sympathy for his mental health struggles, but grew weary of his public attacks on the family. He's allowed to tell his story, she told a senior royal aide, but not at the expense of ours. That distinction, between personal healing and institutional damage, is central to how Anne views the monarchy. For her, public service is not about self-expression. It's about duty. You don't get to pick and choose which parts of royalty you want. You either serve or you step aside. And once you step aside, you can't expect to return. That philosophy now shapes the monarchy's trajectory. In recent months, Anne has begun taking a more visible role in guiding younger royals, not with speeches or directives, but through example. When asked about her opinion on the Sussex situation by a foreign diplomat at a garden party, she simply replied, "The crown doesn't wait for anyone." It was a line that summed up her ethos, and, indirectly, justified the entire rationale behind her husband's elevation. Sir Timothy, for his part, never spoke about the change. He accepted the new duties with quiet professionalism. No interviews, no statements, no gestures, just presence. And for Anne, that was precisely the point. The monarchy didn't need heroes. It needed functionaries. Reliable, steady hands to carry out ceremonies, to uphold traditions, to be symbols of continuity in a world that no longer respects it. In that way, Anne's involvement was not about vengeance or correction. It was about stewardship. She had watched the crown survive scandals, divorces, abdications, and deaths. She had watched it bend, but not break. And now, in her 70s, she was quietly ensuring that it stayed upright. Her message to Charles was simple: fix what's broken. Reward those who serve. Let go of those who don't. That message is now embedded in every decision the monarchy makes. And though Anne may never take the throne, her fingerprints are all over its current foundation. She didn't push her husband into Harry's place. She simply stood where others had fallen. And when the king looked for someone to carry the weight, she pointed not at herself, but at the man who had stood beside her, quietly, for decades. Sir Timothy didn't steal Harry's legacy. Princess Anne safeguarded it from being squandered any further. King Charles has made his final, decisive move, quietly stripping Prince Harry of his Duke of Sussex duties and passing them to Sir Timothy Lawrence, Princess Anne's husband. This isn't just a royal reshuffle. It's a power play shaking the very foundations of the monarchy and igniting chaos all the way to Los Angeles. Tonight, we uncover the shocking reasons behind this bold decision, the emotional fallout for Harry and Meghan, and what it means for the future of the royal family. Stay with us as we reveal the untold story behind King Charles's ultimate chess move.